This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists get funding, gain influence, and build proven, powerful communication skills for interacting effectively with the stakeholders who matter most in their professional world. Reaching those goals often involves effective translation of complicated research into engaging, jargon-free communication that distills complex topics to capture the attention of decision makers and general audiences. Interested in getting a free resource to do just that? Go to complexitymadeclear.com to get the 11 keys for translating complexity. That's complexitymadeclear.com to get your free infographic used by science communicators at major organizations to boil down, but never dumb down, complicated science and technical topics for key stakeholders. I am so pleased to welcome Dasanj Aberdeen to this show today. Dasanj is a transformational leader, product management consultant, creator, mentor, and champion of interdisciplinary education and pursuits. For the past 11 years, she has worked at a global professional services firm and is a director of product management, where she helps clients shape the future of their business with new products, services, and business models that accelerate digital transformation, improve customer service, and create value. In her work, Dasanj leads globally distributed teams in the technology, media, fintech, and health tech spaces. And over the years, she's founded multiple blogs and created content to teach others to leverage their entrepreneurial spirit to achieve their competitive edge in business and life. Dasanj mentors, coaches, and uses technology to democratize knowledge and promote inclusion, motivated by the belief we can improve the human experience and make the world more equitable through technology. And in the superpower category, Dasanj can simplify any complex concept down to a visual one-pager, and we are definitely going to be talking to you about that in a few moments, Dasanj, as she earned her Master of Science in Innovation Management and Entrepreneurship at Temple University's Fox School of Business and her bachelor's degree in economics from University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. Welcome to the show, Dasanj. Fantastic to have you here.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for the great introduction. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. And you mentioned in your bio that you describe yourself as an immigrant and global citizen who embodies, as you put it, a cross-cultural, cross-geographical perspective, which I love that description. Would you share more details about your background and perspective with listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from the Caribbean, grew up in Grenada, and moved to the US when I was 10. So I was old enough to still remember what life was like, still remember walking to the back of the house, picking mangoes, walking down to the beach. And so when I came to the US, as you can imagine, it was definitely different culturally, right? And so at that age, it's very easy to adapt. But at the same time, I had a lot of learning to do. Like I remember when I first moved here, for example, I still had my accent. The kids at school would come up and mention that they've heard that I have an accent and can I speak? But those are things that you deal with it culturally. We're eating certain foods. I'm listening to certain music. And then at the same time, growing up in America, you're learning about American culture. And more and more, I find that I'm interacting with people from all over the world and from all different backgrounds. And I think even in the more recent years, working with teams that are across geographic borders, which is really interesting. And I think when you have a background where your own story is that you've been an immigrant, you appreciate, what it is to juggle both worlds. So that's something that continues to play in my life. I always think about it from both perspectives. And that helps me a lot in terms of relating to new people and understanding where they're coming from. So that's where I think, especially in these times, and again, with remote work, with technology, with being able to hire people from basically anywhere, I think just having that cultural awareness helps people get to that common ground a lot faster.
So true. And I love to say connect before you communicate. And Maybe you can share a little bit about how you talk about your background when you're on a Zoom call with somebody halfway around the world and
Yeah.
they're on your team and or you're their manager, and how do you talk about things like that?
Yeah. I think one thing is that regardless of where you're from, first and foremost, we're humans. And I think that's the absolute first place to start with finding that common ground. Like, for example, growing up in the Caribbean, cricket is very popular. So sometimes when I'm working with team members who may be based in India or somewhere else, they hear that I'm from the Caribbean and automatically they start asking me about cricket. So right there, we find that common ground and the different types of food in Grenada and Trinidad and some of the other islands. There's also Indian influence in terms of the food we eat and lots of curries and things like that. So there's always some way, I think, to find that common ground. And I think when you start with, we're here, we're doing great work, but first of all, we're humans and you have that people first approach, I think that's definitely a way to just break down any barriers that may seem to exist.
Wonderful. Thanks for those stories. And I'm a big believer in that connection principle. What are your thoughts about how you might recommend that others, perhaps who don't have a similar personal background or life experience? I was born in this country, and but I want to, and I'm sure listeners are interested too, many of them, in this kind of connect before you communicate kind of idea to break down barriers as you've described. How do you recommend, say, maybe folks who were born and raised in the United States adopt and apply the kind of approach that you're talking about? Could be international team members, could be collaborators from other countries. What are your thoughts about that?
One of the things about it is to not overcomplicate it. So when I say that all of us at some point in time, we started with a best friend from zero. We didn't know anything about them. And it was, what's your name? What do you like to do? You hang out with them, you spend time, you ask questions, you learn, just learn all the different quirks. So I think that's fundamentally where it begins. It's being interested in people, not just being caught up being interesting to them, but it's asking questions. It's helping create a good experience for Thanksgiving, for example. And let's say you're hosting Thanksgiving dinner. You make sure everything is cooked and prepped. The place looks good. The table is set, the lighting is right, you can smell it, there's something baking in the oven. It's an experience, and so I think when you think about it this way, and this is definitely coming from my background in design thinking as well, I think every time we interact with people, it's about presenting an experience to them. What is that one thing you want people to remember about you? What do you want them to walk away with? And so regardless of backgrounds or culture, where people are coming from, I think everybody can relate to that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Daesang. I mentioned in the intro that one of your superpowers is the ability to distill complex problems down to a one-page visual, which I'm sure many listeners in hearing that are wondering, how does she do that? Because it's one of my favorite things to talk about in this space because it is so challenging. It's not easy. And so I wonder how you approach that challenge and what types of information do you typically want to make sure gets onto the page? What do you usually leave behind? And you also talk about it, the visual. So it's not just text. Could you please share your outlook on this?
Yeah. So for me, I think this comes from me just having so many different interests. It starts with that. It also starts with the fact that early on, I was really deciding when it was time for college if I wanted to study art or business. That was a big thing for me. So think visually, but at the same time, I use my left brain a lot and I love lots of different things. And so when I dive into something, I am just capturing new information all the time. And for me to find ways for it to be useful, oftentimes I have to find those connections. What is it that I can learn in something related to science that goes back to design or art or something that you wouldn't normally think that there are any connections? From my point of view, I think there are always connections. It's a matter of finding it. And especially too in innovation work, I think often around that we dive into one thing, and that's what society has taught us to specialize. And when you're able to learn from different areas and borrow and bring it into other disciplines, that's a huge advantage. You absolutely don't need to start from scratch. In these times with social media, people are scrolling, so many different things coming through your feed. Like, how do you take away what's truly important? How do you get the true nuggets? And so that's what I usually try to focus on a page. It's not about having everything on there. It's about not just pouring data, it's about capturing the true insights, the things that you can say, okay, knowing this, now I have a decision to make or a follow up to do or some action to take. And ultimately, I think those are the key things on a one pager when people are busy. They may not have been in the details, getting all the information. How do you make it something that's actionable for them? They know what's going on. So a little bit of a background, a little bit of the task at hand, laying out the findings and the recommendations, and maybe even questions that remain. So I think just something as simplified as that really helps you distill information down to that one page.
Yeah. Yes. So true. And you brought up art as well. And when you were trying to decide where you want to focus, and art is still a core part of your life, would you share with listeners the origins of your interest in art and the interplay between your art and your leadership in business? You did talk a little bit about that. You talked a little bit about design thinking, but how did this all get started?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. When I was probably around 7, 8, I remember drawing a house and my dad teaching me about perspective. How do you angle the roof of the house and the siding so that you, as someone looking at it, you can get that perception of depth. And that's where it started. And I think as a child, I was very creative. I sewed clothes for my dolls. I just found different ways to entertain myself. And so that continued throughout middle school and high school, especially. I did a lot of artwork and different competitions and I had my work in galleries and things like that. And again, when it came to that big decision for college, it was okay, do I jump into art or do I do something a little more practical, like with business? And I chose business for that reason. But I also continued to do art along the way. And throughout my career, it's materialized in different ways. Like my creativity materialized in different ways. So after art, which is very time consuming at times, right, to do an in depth piece, I said, okay, I don't have all the time. So then I picked up photography. I picked up writing. So it materialized in lots of different ways. But I think going back to that one pager as well, one thing that's really impactful because most people are visual. People get inundated with text. It's heavy. They have to look all over the page. It's not clear what the message and the takeaway is. And sometimes you don't need all the words. You just need an image to complement the words that you do have. And so that I've used as my advantage, something that is innate to me. It brings me joy in the process of making it, but it's also impactful and helpful and invaluable to people because I always think about if I create content on LinkedIn, for example, I always think about the audience and how people learn. We all learn in different ways. Sometimes it's by hearing, some people it's by seeing, some people it's by reading. And so I think that mix and match helps you reach a lot more people at the end of the day.
Yeah. And people don't often see visuals like that in business. A lot of times we have slide decks and maybe there are some stock pictures here and there,
Right.
but like on a one pager, often people are like, how can I cram as much text in as possible? And I'll reduce the font to 9. They don't think about maybe like a picture being worth 1,000 words, so to speak.
Yeah. And you bring up a great point there about marrying art and business, because way back then, I didn't see how the two could come together because it just seemed like two completely different things. And I think now, for me, in the way that I work and what I do, I think work around innovation, work around new things, new products in business. Sometimes you're starting from a blank. And so, from my perspective, I think of that as a canvas, right? You have an idea of what you want to create, but you have to start from the very beginning. You pick your different paint, you start doing a little sketch, you start getting the concept down, and then over time, you iteratively build on that, and then you end up with your masterpiece. So, in a business context, when I am tasked with something that's new and different, there's no prior example, I am not afraid to try something new and start because to me, it's the same process as creating artwork.
I love that. And it leads right to this next one. And as I'm asking it and as you were talking, I'm seeing how you're the perfect person to be focused on innovation because innovation is a term that's thrown around all the time and perhaps it's overused and it's almost lost its meaning in describing new products and services. So I want to start by asking you what innovation means to you and how you help your
Mhm.
clients craft truly innovative products. And it really seems like what you just were talking about could be a nice jumping off point.
Yeah. So when I think about innovation, To your point, it's very overused. I think a lot of people may not even understand exactly what it means. It's become this buzzword. But what I compare it to is creativity. I think people have a lot better understanding of creativity. So creativity really is starting with ideas and how do you bring those to life. Innovation is an extension of that. Innovation is taking those and turning it into action, making it something useful and valuable to people. And in a work setting, in a business setting, that can materialize in different ways, right? I think, for example, the pandemic in the last few years, I think a lot of companies have had to really look at their overall business model. When there are supply chain issues, how do you get your goods where you need to get it? Or how do you get your raw materials from some of the sources if it's impacted by whether it's like travel or trains or whatever the case is? These days as well, like we mentioned, people are so inundated with information. They expect things quickly. They're used to that instant gratification, the likes, and all those things in social media. And that has also gotten to business as well. When companies need to think about their own products, how do you keep up with the demand? The needs of the customer is constantly changing. And you have to think about what do you need to do differently with your products? What do you need to do differently with your services? Sometimes it's introducing something completely new, but sometimes it's enhancing what you already have, what's already existing. It could also be innovation can also be with your processes. So there are lots of different ways that this can happen. It can be with your marketing channels, for example, right? So maybe you don't sell in the store anymore. Maybe you move your sales to online. Maybe you integrate sales with some social media app. So it's finding new ways again so that people still find that value, but it's an extension of it just being an idea. Now you're actually making it something that's tangible to your.
I really like how you talked about questioning first principles, really these fundamental questions. Because if you're going to create something truly new, then it's not a product extension. It's not just basically like adding another lens on the back of the iPhone. So that's not innovation. And then also thinking about your art and the artistry that you bring to business. Sometimes I think about innovation as you're stitching together very disparate things, like you're talking about looking for patterns. And those patterns could be in anything that seemingly is not related, but
Correct.
you're
Yeah.
taking a piece here and there and you're incorporating to something new, which to me is innovative and also really artistic in some ways.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that's one of the gems and secrets that people don't realize unless you're really actively in this space is that you don't need to start from scratch. So there are lots of lessons in other disciplines that you may not even know about. And it's picking up a book, it's speaking to someone in that space. What are you doing? What are you challenged with? And learning what they're doing and seeing how you can apply that in your space. So I like to call it lift and shift. It's really just learning about the different things that are out there. And again, to know that you have to immerse yourself. You have to be constantly learning.
Curiosity that you've had, I'm a big believer in that quality too, as far as one that can really enrich your life and make you even more successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as we wrap up, many listeners are interested in entrepreneurship. And as someone who's been in the innovation and technology space for a long time, what recommendations do you have for listeners who may be interested in getting involved, say in new product development or startups?
Yeah. So I would say start small. We hear a lot about the big, the unicorn type businesses. Everybody loves those stories, but we all start like from zero, from somewhere, and we don't hear enough of those stories, right? It's only after it gets to a certain point, gets to a certain size, then there's a lot of airtime. But at the end of the day, it all starts small. And that's really important because you want to really understand your target market. You want to understand your audience. You want to really understand their pain points. What is it that they need? And how can you help with a solution that can meet them where they are? So it's not so much about loving your product or your idea. It's about your customers finding value in that. So a lot of interviewing, talking to them, understanding what they need. I always say you need to love the problem early on and it continues as well, like discovery continues because people change their minds, they want different things. But it's being able to start small, start with your minimum viable product and continue to test it, get feedback before you expend a lot of resources into it. Learn what is actually going to be valuable, what people are willing to pay for. and then you can go and build from there. So I think this is achievable for anyone with a great idea. Start from your idea, you put it out there, you test it, you learn, and you continue to build. So I think over time, if it's something that has arms and legs and people find it valuable, I think there is that opportunity for that to scale.
Wonderful. And so many people miss that. Two things I was thinking about. One is what you said, love the problem. So it's like the problem, not the product.
Correct. Yeah.
Because it's your baby, it's your thing. You came up
Yes.
with this idea, like it's gonna be great. And then the other related to that, of course, if there's no market for it, is worst case field of dreams. It's not if you build it, they will come. It's you're only gonna build it after they come and are demanding it.
Exactly.
Uh,
That demand is important.
yeah, yeah. Just a great conversation, Dasanj Aberdeen. You're doing really cool work and bringing together all these different elements in creative ways and artistic ways, which of course makes sense given your love and work in art and in business. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Mark. It was great. This conversation was awesome. Thank you so much.
And listeners, thank you for being here on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you will be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.